In part 1, we heard from former Scottish police officers Bob and Rory, who told us about their involvement when Nigel Rannach's remains were found after he had been missing for 3 years. Episode 1 concluded with Rory being on the hunt to find Piglet, with the help of Bob, after receiving a call from the family liaison officer saying that Nigel always slept with this particular toy Piglet, and so should have also been with his remains, and could this toy be retrieved, as Nigel's family would like to bury Nigel with his favourite toy. Instead, Rory and Bob made shocking discoveries. But will anyone listen to their concerns? The story continues now.
I am in the same office that Bob's working from at that point, by coincidence, because I was delivering paperwork when I took the call. And he was upstairs, probably Googling Auto Trader and eating a bag of chips when he should have been out on patrol. He was upstairs in the traffic office looking at cars or motorbikes or something stupid on eBay. And I thought, well, I'm not letting him off with this. This is going to be a god-awful job, so might as well share the pain. So went upstairs and said, Bobby boy, and told him what I've just told you. He agreed to help me on if I gave him Chinese food later that day. So that was it. And this brings Bob into the story from this point. He decides to come with me, and to explain this, the office we were in had a separate production store, it was basically an old garage, not quite attached to the police office, but certainly within the same kind of footprint of the police office almost. And everything would go in there, like productions, bigger productions, stuff that couldn't be held in the production store in the office. It was also a dumping ground for traffic cones and signs and everything else. And there was a secure area of it, so it was like a store within a store of the serious stuff. And we walked in there with Bob. Did we have the production book with us?
Yes, we did. You appeared in my office holding it, clutching it. Angry and clutching it, yeah.
Yeah.
Before we go into it, Bob, tell me about when Rory came to you, what your thoughts were at the time, and, how you got into the police and such like.
My background, so I didn't want to join the police. Now, this could be a whole separate podcast, but basically I'd left university. As Rory will say, I joined the TA.
He mentions it all the time.
I'd started off as an officer cadet. I then applied to do something called P Company, which some of your listeners might be aware is parachute selection. And then from there, I'd applied to join the SAS, and basically I'd succeeded. And I wouldn't normally mention that. It's not anything I'm particularly proud of or anything, but it's very relevant to this story. So I had an accident parachuting, and my mother basically was unhappy with what I was doing, particularly post the first Gulf War, thought I was going to die. And it was suggested that I join the police.
Now, she put the application form in, though, didn't she?
Yeah, my mother basically filled out the form. And my grandmother's next door neighbour was Deputy Chief Constable. So me getting in was probably not an issue. And I didn't know any of that stuff. I just found I was in the police one day and was going to Tullyallen. So jump forward quite a bit. My career had basically taken me very similar to Rory's, urban area in Glasgow, a lot of crime, a lot of drugs, a lot of deprivation, and I'd gone to what was then the traffic, became road policing, and basically liked driving fast. I lived for a car chase, and that was fun. Very different from TV. They're not dangerous. They shouldn't be dangerous. If they're genuinely dangerous, then the person driving the police car is an idiot. If they're dangerous to anyone, it's the public, and you should be standing them down. But they were still driving fast. Was fun when it was on my own, and I got a kick out of it. And for kind of family reasons, I had the chance to transfer into a different area, and I now covered a vast area. So basically, all the way from the border with Northern Police, all the way down to the tip of Campbelltown. So for me, even in a fast Volvo or BMW, blue lighting it, I could be 2 hours from one end to the other. And the bit that Rory policed was a fairly substantial big chunk of that. So I chose to work with him a lot.
I didn't choose to work with him. He kind of attached himself to me like a stray dog.
I mentioned earlier out of a degree of morbid curiosity following him around. Yeah, so I occasionally had a colleague. So the way our shifts worked, I didn't do a night shift, and basically I was phoned out in the middle of the night if we had basically a fatal car crash. But quite often I was on my own. So because I was in his area most of the time anyway, because that was where the big fast roads were, if I could, we would just go and share a car. And as I got to know him better and better and realised he was increasingly very entertaining, we worked a lot and we talked a lot. And we talked a lot about kind of very deep, meaningful discussions. And basically, we were each other's counsellors. I think that's fair to say. So jump forward a bit, and I was sitting in the police office, and I had found out about this incident going on within Rory's area. Now, I had come on back shift, so I started at 2:00, and I was aware that he was already there. And I'm going to just very quickly mention this because I think it's relevant to the story. Mm-hmm. But when Rory asked for the mobile police office to be delivered, that was quite a big deal because the mobile police office was probably an hour south from him, an hour south from me, and we're an hour apart, so basically in a sort of triangle. I'd already popped up just to say hello, but it's not like on TV, so you can't just wander into a crime scene. They're very, very closely controlled. If someone does wander in, that's a big deal. It's a big no-no. But I was asked basically to go back to my home office, pick up another police officer, take them this hour journey south to another police office, pick up this mobile police office that's like a big camper van, and basically then follow them up to the scene and then shuffle people around as necessary.
So you were there quite early on as well then?
Yeah, but I didn't have any interest in it. So I was there just basically... I mean, police documentaries always give this impression that it's dangerous and it's exciting and people are really involved. The reality is for people who've been in the police more than 10 years, it's mundane, it's routine because you do it every day. So I wasn't particularly thinking about what was in this bit of forest or what was in the tent. I was just up there to say hello and bring bacon rolls. So... But I did this with the mobile police office. I took the police officer up there, and then I went back to go off duty near midnight. Now, the reason I kind of mention this and why I think it's relevant, and I'm sure Rory would agree, when I got back and walked into the front bar of the police office, I'd fueled up my police car, washed it, put it to bed for the night for the next shift coming on. I walked into what's called the front bar within the police office, so the radio operator's there and the duty officer, and there's quite a heated debate going on. So we're less than 24 hours into this, but the heated debate was basically around the fact that the police officer who I had run up there, who's a policewoman with about 7 or 8 years service, I think, correct me if I'm wrong there, Rory.
Yeah, you're right.
But was basically refusing to stay. So I dropped her off and she was refusing to stay because it was too scary, in inverted commas here. Now, I'm not being cruel here to the police officer. I think this is very, very relevant. So if you're trying to picture what this site is like. I mean, it's Blair Witch Project on steroids here.
There's no lights, there's no street lights, it's just dark, deathly dark,
It's and you're there potentially on your own with this big police camper van thing. And, much though there was some suggestions in the police office that this was a bit wimpish, in reality, it probably wasn't. I think she was probably just brave enough to actually call it where a lot of people wouldn't have. I think that's fair. It wasn't somewhere you wanted to be on your own with a dead body.
She was still having to go outside. It's not as if she could lock herself in. She'd have to go out and check things, didn't she?
She's there to protect the crime scene. So she's there to stop the press showing up, to stop anyone interfering it. So, I mean, yes, she can go in and out of this mobile police office, but fundamentally, you can't go and lock yourself in the toilet. You're there because you need to be there to protect the crime scene. So that was kind of my first dealings with this, but I didn't think too much more of it. And basically it was solved that night. Somebody else went up and basically took over. But it puts it in context and it's relevant in terms of what we then find out about the missing person and why they would choose to be there, given they're apparently don't like being alone and they're quite gregarious.
Sorry to interrupt, Bob, but I couldn't stay there the night. I couldn't camp there and stay there the night. And there was, let's be honest, there was a lot of banter, humour, slagging off of this officer for being scared, But as you say, she had the courage to call it out. Would I have been comfortable up there alone at night? No. Not, and I'm sitting with 15 years service or whatever. It gives you the EBGBs. Your mind wanders. You're sitting in the woods, in the middle of nowhere, with a dead body. Who's not going to be disturbed by that? But if what Bob's saying as well is, who puts themselves in such a scary place? Because I couldn't.
Yeah.
I couldn't. And we'll talk about that later. Sorry, Bob, on you go.
So let's move forward a wee bit. And I was vaguely aware of rumblings in the office and sort of discontent about the fact it was being called as a suicide early on. But I think most people, and probably Rona included, were, if not entirely happy, not entirely unhappy with it either. And then one night I am happily sitting there minding my own business on eBay, buying cars or motorbikes or whatever, and with my my traffic head on. And a very angry Rory storms in with a production book, ranting about how the CID haven't done things properly and things have not been lodged properly, and he's trying to find Piglet. So I put the kettle on, tried to calm him down a wee bit. Lots of there. It'll be okay in the morning, and basically I was bribed by Chinese food.
Yeah.
So he said, "Look, come with me." I was a family liaison officer as well, so he'd kind of, I suppose, to an extent, chosen the right person. Rory's absolutely right about return of property. I mean, you do anything for a family because it's the time they need you most, and you're not doing it for your personal sense of self-satisfaction. It's a big deal because it's a big deal for them. I've dealt with fatalities where I would return clothing and think, "Oh, who wants this back? You know, it's covered in blood." And the family would say, "I want it because it smells of the person," for example, and you would go out your way and do that. But with something like this, my expectation was we were quickly going to find Piglet. We would take him to the hospital, get dry cleaned, and return to the family, and that would be the right thing to do. It wasn't particularly a big deal, so we go down and we go into this outside production store.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Now, Rory, can you pick up from there and tell us your memories of being in the store, what you discovered and what you were thinking while searching through Nigel's things?
Yeah, so I get Bob, tear him away from his auto trader, and we go downstairs. And I've got the production book, and I summarise. It's been a while, but he's, as he said just there, he's got a vague recollection of what's going on. You know, he knows roughly the story, but it's just another suicide death in beat 28, so another one of Rory's cases. So we crack on, and I said, this is the story. I want you to go and look for this Piglet. It's not going to be a nice job. There's a sleeping bag that somebody's died in and been laid in for 3 years. So we're going to get the suits on, the gloves on, and just like a telly. Not because we were trying to preserve the scene, because we're trying to preserve ourselves. it was pretty dirty, you know. So gloves on, etc. And we goes in. Now, as we walked in, it was what I had alluded to before. The wrong way to do things is throw everything in black bags and just cart it off. That's probably the first time I've seen that. So I go in and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I've only been dealing with the production book, of which is a page, one full page and 2 lines of a next page. But this is 10 black household bags of stuff. And I'm like, right, okay, like where the hell do we start with this? That gives a step for a hint. And it's the first time Bob had set eyes on it as well. And I think he said to me, what is this? You know, what is this? And I'm like, this is Nigel's stuff. And he said, no, that what you're talking about, that this is far too much stuff for one person to be carrying. And he went on to kind of explain, says, no, if he was doing that walk, he wouldn't be carrying all this. And I'm like, well, it's all been split up, Bob, so it's been put into different bags. And I was getting progressively angrier that the CID had done this. But I think Bob was a wee bit more angry. I was more resigned to it. I'm not saying it's what I expected, but I wasn't surprised. I'm like, yeah, they've just cut corners with this. This is just, they've cut corners. And because of them cutting corners, I don't know if this poor fella was wearing gaiters, and I don't know where this Piglet was. And if they had just listed everything like they were meant to, I wouldn't be standing here having to go through this stuff, which was an extremely unpleasant job. So we start to go through the bags. Now, we start finding, I'm going to say there's 3 bags. There's a rucksack type bag. There's a hold all. Definitely 3 bags. I think they were out with the black household bin bags. Bob's deeply concerned about that, not just the amount of bags, but the style of bag. If you think you're going to the gym, you know, with a big gym bag, a hold all, there was one of them, I believe, and a rucksack. And Bob starts questioning this, and I kick into you, Bob, a wee bit and say shut up. I'm probably swearing about the CID, and I'm like, let's just get this Piglet job and done. Let's get out of here. Your Chinese food's waiting for you. Crack on, you know. You take one bag, I'll take the next. And we start going through it. Things become apparent to me. I find a toilet bag with a load of medication on it, and at that point, my anger's probably up now. on a level with Bob's, because if you're telling me that this is a suicidal death and these are the two bits of medicine that you've given me to prove this suicidal death, and I open a black bag and there's a toilet bag with a, excuse my French, a shit ton of medication in it that's not been listed, I'm like, what the hell is this? So I'm kind of getting angrier and angrier in terms of that. We then move on. We have the production book, and Bob's asking me, where's the knife? Where's the knife? And I'm like, at that point, we thought the knife wasn't there with the production, so we were quite annoyed. But I'll just close that bit just now and say the knife, quite rightly, was in the main office. In a more secure place where you would put weapons naturally. But we were just like, where's the knife? They've listed a knife, but there's no knife. What have they done with it? I was aware of photographs of the knife, but I've never seen it since. But it was where it was meant to be. I believe Bob then finds a noose. It's in one of the bags, and it's quite short, and it's climber's rope. You know that rope that you use for climbing. Bob says it was blue. I say it was red, and that's okay. That's okay because memory's what it is. I'm convinced it's red. He's convinced it's blue. It doesn't matter. But it was there, and it was a noose. Now, again, your anger levels increasing all the time because you're thinking, this is a noose. It's not in the production book, and you put it in the production book because it's relevant. Of course, it's relevant for a suicidal death. Now, if this man is sitting alone in a tent in the middle of the woods fashioning a noose, then that's an indication of his mind collapsing, or what else could it possibly be for? You know, and us being cops, we start talking. You could have any sexual connotations. You know, like asphyxiation, that sort of stuff. You know, we're looking at a lot of kit. And we're thinking, right, well, it's either one of two things. It's either used for that, or he is thinking about hanging himself. But it's a very short, stubby noose. It's not. There's no drop on it. It's just a short piece of rope. But the noose is one thing, but the fact that it's not lodged and the medication is making me angry. So we move on. We still haven't found Piglet. We find other property and stuff, and that's okay. The stuff you would expect to find, the clothing, etc. And then we move on to the sleeping bags. Now, one is the one that Nigel has died in, and the other one is not. So because it's my case, I give Bob the clean one, for want of a better word. Probably not suspecting that Piglet's going to be there, but, you know, he can do it. So it doesn't really unzip. We turn it inside out. There's nothing to it. It's worn. It's been out. It's been exposed to the elements for 3 years. It's not in great condition. And then we turn our attention to the main one. And we have to do this. I'm not going to describe what's in that. You can use your own imagination in terms of that. It's not pleasant. Okay, so we turn it inside out, and it's last chance saloon now for Piglet. We haven't found him yet. And I am convinced, I would blame money on the fact that this curly toy is going to be in here, because if Nigel slept with him, where was he sleeping? In the bag. Clues in the name. It's a bag. It's going to be in it. Turns it out, and there's no Piglet. But what did fall out was a condom. So a condom fell onto the floor in front of us. It was used. I won't be too crude, but there was still semen within it, and it was still liquid. Now, in the police, there is, I'm going to swear here, forgive me, there is routinely at most calls, there's an oh shit moment. Like, oh shit. Right. Okay. This was a no, oh fuck moment.
Okay.
So,
yeah.
and we're like, and we both stopped, and we're like, right, okay, missing the medication, missing the noose, that's bad, but missing this is different level, So we have an issue here, and we did what cops do. We stopped, we stepped back, and we discussed, and we're like, what are we going to do? And there is the right thing to do, and there's the wrong thing to do. We obviously do the right thing. We can't ignore this. We contemplate what the condom means. We go back through what we've already found. I go back into the toilet bag, and there's 2 other condoms in there. I think, that had been lodged bizarrely, or they were, or either I found them in his production book. But there's a pack of 3 condoms.
And that had been logged, but the used one hadn't.
Yeah, the 2 condoms had been lodged, but this one obviously had been missed for obvious reasons, because they'd just thrown everything in a black bag. And I was like, right, okay, we have an issue here, and I'm going to be crude, but when we were discussing it, we're like, right, that there is 2 reasons this condom is in this sleeping bag, it was either on him or in him or close to him. Now, was he masturbating? That's possible. That's possible. There's a couple of issues with that. Why? The condom, fine. And afterwards, why sleep with it? That's one thing. It's very crude. I appreciate that. The other thing is, now this is how we're talking, you know, the other thing is, at the point of your death, where you're taking your own life, is a sexual act something, a thing of pleasure? Is that something that the mind takes on board? Because by its very definition, you're getting no pleasure out of life, so you're ending your life. But we're having this kind of deep, meaningful conversation to the point where we just end up saying, doesn't matter. None of this matters. Who cares? What matters is what's in it and what we do with it now. So I got a production bag. It's a small self-sealed polythene bag. I picked it up with a gloved hand and put it in it, and I sealed it and I signed it, and I said, the sudden death of Nigel Rannach, do not destroy. I signed it, and I lodged it as a production at that point. We'll go back to Bob and see, because remember I said different opinions and different views, and he had a very much more detailed intake of what he was looking at in terms of hill walking and stuff, whereas I just seen a bag full of stuff. Bob, are you there?
Hello. Yes, I am.
Hello.
Yes, I am. So
we're just talking about the garage there.
Mm-hmm. So I'm looking through the production book myself as we're kind of talking about this and thinking, well, if Piglet's there, he's in the production book. It has to be. Production books have to be done right. Now, there's an odd kind of hierarchy here, because you would think all productions are equal in an Orwellian type style, but they're not. If a production's lodged in the police office, then it's in a safe, or it's in a room that's locked. So you can put things like firearms, drugs in there, and the world is a happy place. But I was well used to dealing with fatalities on the road, and you tended to have quite bulky productions, potentially even vehicles, bits of motorcycle clothing, motorcyclist leathers, that sort of stuff. So they went into a different store, or potentially were even locked away in a third-party garage. So basically, the police had a garage external to the police office that you could put a production in, and yet oddly, it was not that secure. So it's not as good as a safe. You could put a bit of a motorbike in it, or you could put in clothing. And it was also used to store traffic cones and road signs and all that sort of stuff. So basically, Rory says, like, this is where everything is. And I'm thinking, well, okay, fair enough. Well, it's just clothes. Surely it should be in the little store. But we go out, and this thing is just like a kind of big garage, a kind of an old style 30s asbestos type building. And it's got the kind of roller shutter door. And in it's got a small door, and we kind of open the small door, and you go in, and you can imagine it's dark and dank, and we've got torches to look around in it. And Rory says to me, we'll start over here. And I'm kind of looking at all these productions for Piglet, and I'm thinking, straight away, you've got to be joking. You've told me this is someone who's walking this long distance route. Well, they didn't do it with all this stuff, and there's literally like 8, 9, 10 bags of big black bags full of stuff. And as we're kind of going through this, we're kind of putting that to the side of our minds, and we just start searching through it and looking. But at the same time, we're discussing the case, and I didn't know much about it. So maybe because I didn't know much about it, apart from my exploits taking the mobile police office up there, I was asking silly questions, and I was probably asking the same silly questions that Rory asked himself when he first saw it. And I think that was maybe quite good, because it's refreshing his memory of what he thought the very first time he walked into the trees. And I'm saying things like, look, this is wrong. Why have you got 2 sleeping bags here when you're saying you've only got one person? And he starts saying, well, I bought a sleeping bag. I was like, well, okay, I might go and buy a new sleeping bag. I don't carry the old one around with me just in case. That doesn't make any sense. And then as we're searching around, earlier Rory mentioned the shoes. And I had to kind of remind myself of this and be certain and look back at the photos years later. But I found 2 pairs of boots. Now, they're very different styles of boots. So one of the pairs of boots is basically a really good brand. They're broken and they're clearly used. And well, it's hard to tell after they've been there for 3 years. But they're probably pretty well looked after, decent leather hill walking boots. And then there's another pair of boots that I'm not going to say they're cheap, but they're maybe more budget boots. And I was kind of thinking, well, that doesn't Why have two pairs of boots?
Were they the same size of boots?
No, and I wish I could prove that. Now, I'm digressing slightly because there is a photo of the other pair of boots that was taken by another police officer who was very uncomfortable destroying them at a later date.
The boots I recall are brown leather walking boots, and then my memory is something black laying underneath the skeleton. Now, I never seen the boots again. I only ever seen photographs. Do you remember the boots as brown walking boots? I
Yes.
can't tell you the sizes because I never seen them. I never touched them.
So the boots I remember, the good pair, are brown, sort of leathery hill walking boots. Your classic kind of leather hill walking boots with a sort of soft bit behind the heel. The other pair of boots, now there was a photo of them taken by someone who we'll call Homeless Horse. And
he wasn't stable.
He wasn't stable, which is a great. But he at later date.
Well, he had no stable. He wasn't stable.
He wasn't stable. So he at later date was told to destroy these productions, and we'll come on to that. But basically, he was uncomfortable doing that, so he took a photo. But basically, the other pair I would have described as basically being cheaper, and I kind of held them up. But in my head, I mean, you have to. I know this is me trying to justify my own actions, but at this stage, I wasn't looking out for a mystery here. I was just helping find Piglet. But I did kind of look at them and think, well, that's okay. It's two sleeping bags. That's two people's boots, and
that's odd.
A pair of shoes and two rucksacks and a black Nike hold all. And we're going through all this stuff, and we're kind of having the conversation as we do it. And again, it's dark and gloomy, and it smells, and it's not particularly pleasant. But I'm kind of asking questions about, well, how's all this stuff there? If you're saying the car is parked at the north end of this walking route, why is all this stuff there? Now, I'm going to slightly jump away from the topic here, but this route that we think is that he's potentially walking, so 96.1 miles, it goes from the south of Scotland up to the north. It goes from a major city basically up through some of the most beautiful scenery, I think, in the world, and ends up in quite a small town in Scotland. All fictional, of course. But anyway, that's it. So you might, or some of your listeners might say, well, why are you saying it's south to north? Almost everybody, probably 99% of people walk this from the south to the north. And the reason they do that is, well, first of all, that's the way everybody does it. That if you buy a book on this particular long distance walking route, that's the way it'll probably describe it. If you go online and look at it on a website, that's the way it'll describe it. But probably more importantly, it's quite uplifting because you start in the city and the scenery gets better and better and better after each day. And also the prevailing wind then is at your back. So if you try and walk it southbound, it can be quite hard going. Now, I knew it really, really well because I used to go up and jog along it or walk it regularly. And there's another aside to this. If you try and walk it or jog it southbound, and I did sometimes because I would do a leg and turn and then come back to where I dropped off the car, you end up saying hello to everybody. I mean, it is such a pain in the neck. If you're walking it northbound, you're walking in a little bubble of people walking alongside you. You'll occasionally overtake someone or they'll overtake you. But generally speaking, you see pretty much the same 10 or 20 people all day. If you try and walk it the other way, you're going to get seen by, I mean, everybody. You'll say hello to 200-300 people that day. If the narrative was that this car is at the north end of the way and he's walked south, and you're saying to me, Roy, well, hang on, this guy's very distinctive. He's been in the TV documentary. How's he not been seen?
And he's got a rucksack, and he's got holdalls, and he's carrying 10 bin bags worth of stuff with him.
Yeah,
it's like going down the M8 the wrong way. I mean, and we're looking for this guy, and he's wearing a distinctive jumper. As you say, Bob, how did he get from there to where he was found?
Yeah, so I've got all these questions going through my head. Now, earlier on, and it wasn't just kind of boasting, there is a rationale behind this, but I'd done SAS selection, and the very last walk to get into that is called endurance. It's about 75 kilometers, and it's done in usually about 22-hour period. I was well used to walking a long distance, and I knew what you carry with you, because when you're doing that walk, you have to carry all your stuff with you. But I'm looking through all this stuff, and for example, there's a big shortbread tin in there, and I'm looking at it thinking, this is pointless. And between the two rucksacks, you have pointless duplications. The sleeping bags is a big one, but why have a pair of decent hill walking trousers and then have another pair of cheaper hill walking trousers? Why have all these duplications in terms of tops and t-shirts and socks and all this sort of stuff between the two rucksacks? Now, some of your listeners might well turn and say, whoa, wait a minute. Wouldn't the sensible thing to be, if you're going to walk this route, you hide some stuff halfway down it so that you can basically pick stuff off on the way down, fresh change of socks, etc. I kind of buy that, but I've done that myself when I'm out walking. I'll basically cache stuff at the side of a route. But the problem with this is, if you're going to do that, the stuff you hide that you're going to pick up is going to be the stuff you need. So you're probably going to hide stuff like camping gas fuel, perhaps food, water, Puritabs, drinks, that sort of stuff you don't need on day one. The problem with the way this stuff is the stuff that is then in the other rucksack is stuff you needed on day one. So why would you have a second sleeping bag? You need the sleeping bag the first night, unless you're saying you've done this huge 45-mile yomp in one day. Now, that's not impossible. You could probably do that in 24 hours. I think it's about 1,400 meter total ascent. And obviously you've got descents in there too, but it's just about doable in a day. But it doesn't tie in again with the narrative, because if you were trying to storm down that, you would be seen. And I don't think there's many people who try to do that in a day. So all of this again is kind of coming round to the fact I'm really not happy with the volume of stuff I'm seeing here and the story that's going with it. So the more logical one that's kind of going through my head is, when I've done this way, I will go and drop a car off at the top of it. And there's a couple of good reasons for that, because if you then go back to the start and you start walking north with your buddies, you've got a car to get home. Mm-hmm. And what you do is you drop the car at the top, and your buddies come pick you up in car B, and you drive down to the start and drop it off. And then you walk up, you pick up car A at the top, and then you drive back and pick up car B, and the whole thing works fine. But that only works if there's two of you.
Yeah, and Bob, I mean, that person that's going to give him a lift from the car to the start of the walk, that's someone who's going to know he's missing. So why wouldn't they come forward and say, I gave him a lift? Mm. If he was in a bus or a train, why did nobody see him?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So all these things are kind of stacking up, and I'm just getting increasingly uncomfortable. And what I kept saying to Rory throughout this was, as we're searching it, I'm becoming quite anxious about the fact that I feel we're damaging a crime scene, because nobody's given me the right answer for this. And I'm looking at it, and every time we open a different bag, I'm sort of saying, Rory, if this turns out to not be a suicide, if there's more to this, if there's a second person there, we're damaging a crime scene, because there's potentially DNA evidence, there's hairs, there's fibers, and we're trawling through it and contaminating it. So should we be doing this? Now, I know you'll probably say, well, it was already contaminated when it was taken to the production store, and that's true, but we're just making it worse and worse and worse. And then we start talking about things that I maybe hadn't realised that are kind of at that stage, but Rory's telling me about stuff he knew, like the knife, and going in with the IB photographer, and both him and the IB photographer basically calling it as suspicious. And I'm increasingly kind of thinking, well, this just doesn't feel right. And there's other problems with the way the property has been lodged. So if you want to land and bother, productions is a big one, but productions that are money or drugs, huge. You do that right. There's a kind of standing joke in the police. If you leave a torch in a police office, it will get stolen. If you put £10 down top of a radiator, you can come back a week later, it'll still be there. Everyone is super cautious with money. And yet in this production store, there's a load of scrunched up, damp money that's obviously been part of this production. And it's just left lying there. It's not through a production book. It's not registered. And it's just sitting scrunched up. And that's a big no-no. So that's flagging alarm bells for me too. I'm very uncomfortable about that. And then we're looking through, there's other medicines that Rory finds in the rucksack that he's looking through.
I think you're nipping my ear with all this information's coming into me, and I'm trying to make it fit the suicide narrative. So I'm saying, basically, Bobby, going to shut up and just find this piglet.
Yeah.
Let's just get this piglet. Let's get out of here. Let's cut to the chase and get out of here. Yeah, there's too much stuff, but yeah, we're looking at a burial soon. So I'm towing the party line almost, but still angry, whereas you're nipping away, quite rightly.
I kind of feel a wee bit, I'm almost like his conscience sitting on his shoulder saying, look, I'm uneasy about this. And then a couple of things really start to fall into place for me. So there's medicine, there's blister packs, but there's still pills in a lot of them. Now, I've as have Rory, I've been to a lot of suicides. I can't think of one I've ever been at where someone who's wanted to commit suicide has said, "Right, I've got 20 pills. I'll just take 5 and see how it goes.
Mm.
You know, if they don't work, I'll come back later and get the rest." That didn't kind of fit the narrative at all. I'm thinking, well, there's either empty blister packs or there's full blister packs and they've not been used. You don't have a halfway in between. And then the kind of final sort of nail in the coffin, if you like, that's really got my kind of the little alarm bells going off. As we're looking through, there's a noose. Now, this noose is made out of what I would have described as kind of army paracord, which is quite strong. It's not quite as thick as climbing rope. It's nylon. We have debates over what colour it was, but memory is a kind of strange thing. You know, if we both agreed.
Go for it. What colour was it, Bob?
See, in my head, it's red.
You're right. So I must have said blue initially.
Yeah.
It is red, and the reason it's red is because I've memorised a
Yeah.
fictional email that I sent to someone
Right.
describing it. You were right. I was wrong. It was red.
Yeah, I might have remembered it as blue at the time. You know,
So we've got it. It's definitely
It was
red
a
then.
red. It was a red noose.
Yeah.
One other thing while I'm talking, Bob, was there any drink in there? Alcohol?
no, and that.
You
and
sure?
that- yeah, I'm absolutely definitely. I mean, you would have seen if there'd been something that obvious, and
Can't
it should have been through the
Can't
production
remember.
book. But I mean, that's another kind of alarm bell, I suppose, that there's no alcohol and there's nothing to kind of wash these pills down with, if you like, if it is a suicide. But the noose was a strange one for me because we're kind of looking at it and thinking, well, it's the wrong size. You know, this is going to sound macabre, but it's the right size to put around your neck, but the long bit coming off it's really short, so you couldn't actually hang yourself with it, but it's too small to be an ornament like a key ring. So basically, you could throttle somebody with it, for lack of a better way of putting it, but you're never going to hang it around a branch. It's just not long enough to have the kind of drop to do that. So, and we're kind of talking away about that, and then we roll out one of the sleeping bags and try and turn it inside out to find Piglet. I remember it as being the newer of the two sleeping bags. Again, memory's a funny thing. Some of your listeners might be saying, "Well, you two should remember this," and both have the same story. I remember early doors of the police. I'm going slightly off on a tangent here, but there was a sheriff did a presentation to police officers post the Dunblane massacre, and he was talking about a cognitive interview statement. And he basically said, if you ever get two witnesses that say exactly the same thing, they're lying. One of them's lying. They've talked to each other. I think it's healthy that we disagree and argue about some of this. But we roll out the sleeping bag, and inside it there's a used condom, very obviously used condom, and I won't go into too much more detail, but that is quite an unpleasant thing. But then our conversation goes straight off into what the hell, this really is a, pardon my language, but a what the fuck moment. How can that be in there? Yeah, not a very nice discussion, but my logic is, well, hang on a minute, if that is in there because you want to keep the inside of a sleeping bag that you've just bought nice and clean, well, that doesn't tally with the fact that you're about to knowingly leave a dead body in it.
No.
So that doesn't make sense. So if it's there for any other reason, well, surely it's there because either you're wearing it or it's somebody else's and it's been left in the sleeping bag. And then if you come back to it being a suicide, I'm kind of thinking, well, if you're going to commit suicide, there's probably something in the back of your head saying at some point someone's going to find you. I mean, that's why people leave suicide notes. Do you really want to be found with a used condom there? So there's a lot of problems going on here, and I think we both get to the point where we just say, whoa, stop. We are contaminating whatever we want to call it here. If it's a suicide or murder or a crime scene, whatever, we're contaminating it. We have to stop. So the condom is put in a production bag. Rory labels it all up. We go back into the police office and we speak to someone who I have to say I quite respected, who'd been a uniform sergeant, but had also prior to that been a detective, and I suspect a very good detective. Let's say I liked him, but I didn't have any particular beef with him here. Rory explained in depth the kind of issues that we had, and then I was kind of in the background when a phone call was made to the crime scene manager, and it was obvious there were some uncomfortable questions and sort of home truths being explained here, and it was getting quite heated. And the line I kind of remember out the back of it was sort of, don't rock the boat here. This is done. It's a suicide. It's written off. The fiscal is happy with it. You don't need to know any more about it.
Okay, Rory, can you tell us your recollection of what happened after you left the store with Bob?
Myself and Bob walked from the production store to the main police office and found the duty sergeant. The duty sergeant was the same sergeant that was up at the scene, who used to be in the CID. And he's like, okay, let's deal with this. I'm probably in some sort of mad rant about incompetence, and the C word is getting bandied about. Everything. It's at that level, you know. Bob's like, oh my God, what's going on here? None of this is right, you know. And he said, okay, I'll phone the officer in charge. I wasn't privy to that phone call. It was done at the charge bar, and I heard one half of the conversation, and it was a telephone to the ear for the other, between the duty sergeant and that. My understanding of that, and I won't repeat exact words in that because I'm wary of getting them wrong. My understanding of that was, leave it alone, Rory. Don't rock the boat. It's a suicide. The funeral's tomorrow. It was something like that. You know, the funeral's in a couple of days. I went away, ranted at Bob. Bob got the brunt of it. And he was more vocal. And I'm like, I don't know what to do at this point. I am doing well in my job. I'm very successful in my job. I'd been asked in the past to do my promotion exams and get promoted, and I chose not to because I didn't want to leave my little office, but I had done them. I'd felt I was coming towards the end of my tenure, and I thought, well, I can get possibly promoted. Blue-eyed boy, could do no wrong, was appraised for doing stuff like this, and I thought, well, I wasn't going to rock the boat. And like, okay, just move on. I've got another one waiting for me. That's the wrong decision. I totally acknowledge that. And off it went. Now, when I say I totally ignored it, I didn't completely. We made a couple of solid decisions, myself and Bob. The first one was to ensure that we protected the condom as much as we could. We put it in a freezer that was for the DNA freezer in the office. We spoke to the production officer, who was a civilian, and told that production officer, under no circumstances does anybody come and get that without us knowing about it. If somebody asks about this, or if somebody asks for it to be destroyed, or not that we thought it would be destroyed, but if anybody asks you, it's my production, you tell me, I'm the reporting officer. And that stayed up until the day we left the police, that promise, that agreement, and to my knowledge, nothing had happened of it. However, the next day, bizarrely, it was April Fool's Day, by happy coincidence, I emailed the officer in charge of the case, the crime team manager who had come up. I emailed them and outlined what we had found, and told them about the noose in particular and the condom, and asked them for, basically, I think it wasn't that strongly worded. It was just to say, I think I said in the email, listen, the family are quite, not needy, but they certainly have a few questions and a few demands. And just so that we're all speaking from the same hymn page, as it were, just to let you know, we've found this noose and this condom. Do you want me to do anything with it? I've lodged them in the relevant police office. That email went unreplied. And that email was sent to the officer who was on the phone call from the duty sergeant. Although I had been told secondhand from that duty sergeant to don't rock the boat, and if I remember right, the funeral had been, I think what it said was that the PF was aware, and the remains had been buried yesterday. I think that's what I said in the email. So yeah, the burial had taken place, but it wasn't too late as far as I was concerned to highlight what we'd found, and that takes us up to the end of it for a long period of time for me.
And is that the end of it for you too for a while, Bob?
Now, this is going to sound very, very callous of me, but I think, like Rory, we both had a lot of stuff going on at the time. You know, TV documentaries aren't true in this respect. Nobody gets all the time they want to, work away on something, unless it's a really, really big case. And things aren't particularly personal. So I just went away, I guess, and started working on the next fatality that the cards dealt to me.
Is it fair to say, Bob, remember we talked right at the start about the gang, the 8,000 strong gang? If you're standing up and you're receiving an instruction, let's not call it an order because it doesn't merit being called an order, but you're receiving an instruction to ignore new evidence, you've got a couple of options there. To be absolutely blunt, you throw away your career and walk away.
Yeah.
Or you follow that instruction. By throwing away your career, what you're doing is throwing people under the bus.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
You're throwing senior officers and people that you may respect in certain elements of the work under the bus. So you're looking at, from a personal point of view, your pension, your livelihood, the job you love, or crack on. to the next one because this one's done.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. And well, I'm not sitting here saying that's the right thing to do. Of course, it's not the right thing to do. But unless you're in that circumstances, dealing with the volume that we were dealing with policing as it was back in the day,
yeah,
it's a hard one. It's a hard one to sit here and justify. It took a while, but it's the reason we're maybe talking on podcasts and stuff like that just now. And that when you're faced with a dilemma, it's a dilemma that doesn't go away.
No, indeed. And it didn't go away. And we talked about it, over the years. There was all sorts of other stuff happening. We'd meet in the pub, we'd have a discussion. And this one kept coming up. That I think there was for both of us a degree of unhappiness with it. And we're thinking, it just doesn't kind of sit well with either of us.
Was there other situations where you've come across maybe people, other police officers, not towing the line, and you saw what maybe happened to them? Was that at the back of your mind as well? Had you witnessed that?
Well, that's a whole different podcast, and the victim of it is Rory. So yeah.
Yeah, I am the victim of that.
But before you, Rory, before you.
See if you're making a collective decision about something for the greater good. Read into that whatever you may want. That's okay, as long as you have an understanding of it, an agreement of it, and are part of the decision process. When you're told, crack on, Rory, son, it's a suicide, write it, put your name in the bottom of this, that's a different thing. That's you being asked to consider something that isn't entirely within your decision-making process.
Yeah.
And when the buck stops, I can assure you the buck stops for the reporting officer. You are the officer that's reporting the facts to the Procurator Fiscal. And are all the facts all the time correct in every police report? No, they can't be. It's human nature. But by and large, I'd never faced this type of dilemma before where it was so personal. And I was flippantly talking about a lawnmower earlier on, and I'd done house-to-house inquiry for a theft of a lawnmower out of shed before. I don't think even house-to-house. There wasn't many houses, but there was properties close by. This is somebody's life. This isn't a car stereo that was stolen. This is a man. Mm-hmm. And if we can't investigate the circumstance of his death properly, then what exactly is it we're doing?
Yeah.
I kind of feel to some extent I'm the little angel or devil on his shoulder, the little kind of nudge of conscience and was here, because years later, I went to the Scottish Police College as an instructor. And there is, at the Scottish Police College, there's a safe with a block of drugs in it. Yeah. Now, this might sound bizarre, but a lot of people who join the police have never seen drugs. And I was one of them. It was totally new to me. I didn't know what cannabis smelled of. I was very naive. I was brought up in the country and, had a fairly good upbringing. So when I was there, what they basically did is they passed it around the class and everyone had a look at cannabis and various other drugs, etc. When I went back there as an instructor, kind of 18 years later, I'm pretty sure it was the same block. And I was looking at it thinking, well, it doesn't smell of anything anymore. It's dead. So I got straight on the phone with I just say the approval of some supervisors. I got onto the production keeper at my former police office and said, have you got any drugs? So, it's a promise. It's not for the Christmas party. It's for the safe at the police college. And lo and behold, a little while afterwards, I got a phone call saying, yeah, come on up. We've got some stuff that's interesting. And I went and got lots of interesting stuff to show classes. I like to make them quite fun for my students. Mm-hmm. So I took a drive up, and when I was back at my old police office, picking up these drugs, I thought, do you know what? I ran courses a lot to do with death. I had a reputation for dealing with death because it was what I'd done for years as a family liaison officer and also as a crash investigator. And, I'd probably at that stage dealt with well over 100 deaths. So I was the go-to guy to do classes even for other courses. And I thought, I've got a lot of boxes up in the document storage room here that have got my old cases in it.
Yeah, now you see now, Bob. You were very good at reporting deaths, fatal road accidents, right? So what he was looking for was something a wee bit different, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Something a wee bit out of the ordinary. Maybe a suicide, maybe a drowning, something that didn't involve wheeled vehicles colliding into each other, because his stories were getting frankly very boring and his students were falling asleep. So he thought, how can I spice this class up? I know what I'll do.
Yeah.
Rory. Well,
Can rely on Rory to spice things
Yeah,
up.
exactly.
I could go better places than this. I get slagged off. So basically, I went up to the store and I took loads.
Mm.
I took 5 or 6 big box loads, and they're like if you watch TV, the big kind of paper boxes that lawyers have when they go into court. So I took loads of these away, and I started to use them at the police college. And then one day I thought, I'm going to show people this one. And actually, much though I hate complimenting you, the original crime scene management at it was very, very good. So I would show.
Was that by me? By me, is that what you're saying?
Well, you probably asked.
The original crime scene management, is that right?
You,
By the original attending officer was what? Very good? Is that what you just said?
I think you probably
Just to
asked.
clarify that on the record.
I think you probably asked a suitable adult for some help, but I would show students pictures of the original crime scene, and show that like this is the route in, that's the route out, that's where everyone goes, this is how it's marked, all this sort of stuff. That's the little trays that go in the ground that you step on so you don't disturb the ground underneath, all this sort of stuff. And I would show people pictures of the inside of the tent. And the very first time I did this to a class, one of the students sticks their hands up and kind of goes, "Well, where's the other guy or girl? Where's the other person?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, I'd kind of forgotten about that." And then I kept showing it to other courses, and very quickly I thought, I'm going to stop showing these because every course asked the same question about where's the other person. So I went away from that kind of quite troubled. And then for various reasons, now you do a podcast, it's a very similar story to this, where you say the police officer kind of left the police under a bit of a cloud. I didn't. I left the police as being a kind of go-to guy. It was everyone thought highly of me. It wasn't the reason I left, but before I left, I basically went back and had a look at all this stuff, and was quite troubled by it. And okay, maybe I broke the rules a wee bit, but I took photographs of the production book because I was unhappy with what was in it. And then after I'd left the police for a while, to cut a very, very long story short, I wrote a book about some of the stuff that had gone on in the police, and this was one of the chapters in it, and that elevated it into a degree of public attention. From there on in, it's kind of disappeared. I know from the police there was talk of it being reopened, but the police to me never gave an explanation for why things were the way they were, and I don't think they ever will. Because to do that, they'd have to re-investigate it, and that would cost money.
Well, coming in there, Bobby boy, they did, for as a really popular and trendy thing to say, isn't it? They cold cased it and reopened it and all that. But they did genuinely do that. They reopened it by all accounts. I had stayed quiet. I came out the police, which is a completely different podcast, but I stayed quiet for a long time. Bobby had written his book. Things had made the press. I felt it was time in terms of the family to speak out. And I believe the case was mentioned at the Scottish Parliament by an MSP. In the Parliament at that time was a Lord Advocate, and he had asked for basically for the case to be reopened. I reached out to him. I said, I am the reporting officer. I'm happy to speak to yourself, your office, or lawyers' representation in the family, or the family themselves for that matter, but I'd rather not speak to the police. And I never got a reply. I got a one-word reply saying, thanks, we'll be in touch in terms of that. The case was reopened and closed again. Let's bear in mind, Rory was the reporting officer for this fictional case. He was never spoken to by anybody in this second investigation. Perhaps if he was spoken to, he would have corroborated Bob's story in Bob's book, and that would have been a right old pickle. It kind of ended there, but in terms of the hotel, what we have to look at is this hotel was ridiculously close to the scene of the recovery of Nigel. Now, to walk past it made absolutely no sense. And that, okay, you may not have the money to book a room in the hotel, but you had a bunkhouse.
Okay.
A bunkhouse for walkers. It's only a tenner, if that's what you wanted to do. You had somewhere to use the toilet. You had somewhere to get a pint and get a meal. And more importantly than that, you had a very flat and a very safe and a very picturesque, floodlit almost, campsite.
Right.
As part of the hotel, right next to it, right next to a very iconic bridge.
How far are you talking? Just how far away is that?
From where Nigel was recovered?
Yeah.
Less than a quarter of a mile.
Right, okay.
They're really not far at all. It's certainly within sight. So the footpath, the walk that Bob was talking about goes right through it, if you like. But to get to where Nigel was found, you have to deviate by a couple of 100 yards to the right from the footpath. Okay, so you're making a conscious decision to come off the path, walk a couple of 100 yards along a single track road to the right-hand side, from there, take a very sharp left and walk directly into very dense Caledonian pine forest. Now, the tent's only in there for one reason, and that is to conceal the tent. So what's the point of concealment of the tent? So as you're not found, or to conceal the tent so as you're not seen? It just didn't really make sense. None of that's the thing that I kind of struggled with. And if we go back to when I was first talking about Nigel, this is a man who's afraid, doesn't like to be alone. And if you remember the police officer who didn't like being up there alone, in order for him to pitch his tent in there, it's taken a bit of courage. So if we look at the sleeping bags, are you taking 2 sleeping bags because you're expecting company? Or do you have 2 sleeping bags because you've had company? Are you taking a 3-pack of condoms because you're expecting company? Because do you take a 3-pack of condoms when you're going walking?
Just in the off chance.
Just in the off chance that you get lucky and you meet a fellow hill walker. I don't know. Maybe you do. And I know what Bob was saying about carrying too much stuff.
Yeah.
And carrying like biscuit tins and stuff like that. It's funny, I'd forgotten about that. But we have to play devil's advocate there as well and say, is this man's mind completely shutting down? So what we think is rational or irrational, he thinks is rational.
True.
He thinks it's normal to gather all this stuff together. Well, that's taking your own life is far from normal. So, you have to see the behaviour prior to that is irrational.
Well, I understand that, but then there's the how did he physically carry all this stuff, regardless of whether he left his car in the north or walked from the south? How is he carrying all this stuff?
I'm very cautious about what I was saying. When he did these Monroes, half the Monroes, he did it with a childhood friend. That childhood friend was interviewed by the press, and he had said he felt that Nigel it had all become too much for him, and he had just taken himself off and didn't want to be a burden on his family. And he didn't say it as such, but if you read in between the lines of the document, it's clear that he had thought he'd committed suicide. Well, my question then is I'm the reporting officer. Why did I not know this guy's name? What else was this guy privy to in terms of Nigel's inner feelings and thoughts? And so the tabloid press are speaking to him, but we, the police, are not speaking to him. His father also said that his worst fear that his son was lying in the woods unfound for 3 years, which is poetic, but it's dreadful. But the thing with the hotel, that's important. That was a safe house. The hotel and the campsite's there for a reason. It's a safe place, Did he go in there for a meal? Did he go in there for a pee? Why conceal it? It's so close to that walkway, but it's so close to the walkway, but so well hidden that it stayed hidden for 3 years. Now that's a single track road that I'd be driving once, twice a week, maybe. You couldn't see it. You physically couldn't see it, and it's less than a lorry's width away from the road where he was actually recovered. But what is for sure is that the tent was concealed. Now, if it was concealed to take his own life or it was concealed for another reason, I'm not sure.
So are you saying that you mentioned there that you're asking, did he have a meal there? Did he have a pint there? So you're saying that was never even looked into either, that nobody was ever in.
Well, what you've got to remember is I'm the reporting officer, so if that was the case, that should surely come to me.
And nothing that never came to you either.
No, nothing.
Wow.
So did anybody actually go to the hotel? Now it's not far. It's a 2-minute walk. It's a hotel I was never out of. I was very, but it was accepted. That was, I'm told by senior officers this is a suicide. I've got no reason to disbelieve that. The actual question as to whether it was, I started this story by telling you I think it's a suicide, but was somebody else with him prior to the event? Or was he expecting someone, or is there an underlying? There's obviously an underlying factor as why he felt he had to take his own life. But I kind of end it with there's outstanding questions for sure. There's outstanding questions, right? And so, why was there so much kit at the campsite? Why buy a new sleeping bag and still carry an old one? Did Nigel plan to meet up with someone, hence the sleeping bags and the condoms? Who owned the other pair of shoes, or were they Nigel's? Why was the tent deliberately concealed by a man afraid of being alone? How did Nigel get there without being seen by one single person on this busy Highland trail? Was his childhood friend spoken to by the police? to shed light on his friend's camping habits. After all, when Nigel went walking, he did so with his childhood friend, routinely. What was the extent of the second police review? I don't know. And despite freedom of information requests by the press, that's deemed not in the public interest to release that second review. And crucially, where is the condom now? Whose semen is inside it? Which brings us back full circle to where is Piglet. So the condom and when we left the police in 2013, I believe, my understanding it was still there. I don't know. So the answers remain unknown. But all that aside, the facts. If we just stick to the facts, not the talk and the chat and the rumours and what Bob believes and what Rory believes and what the press believe, and the facts are, it was a 2-man tent with one body within it. There were 2 sleeping bags. There was a significant amount of kit for one man to carry. The car was 50 miles away. He had the keys on him.
Okay.
The tent was deliberately concealed from view. There was a used condom found inside one of the sleeping bags. Piglet is missing from Nigel's home and from the scene, and the police undoubtedly missed crucial evidence at the time and chose to ignore it when it was presented to them.
The close-off for me in terms of and I don't have a huge involvement in this. I think sometimes I get kind of the blame for being the one, if you like, who brought it to light. But just before I left, I went and basically had a look at the production book to see what happened, see if the condom still existed, etc. And also had a look through all the file before it was returned back to that office, because I had to return everything before I left. And when I did that, the email that you sent, basically after we had left the garage, was there. Basically saying, this is the problem, making you aware of it, etc., etc. All very polite and to the point and factually correct. The production book, when I looked at it afterwards, now to put this in context, if you put something in that production store, it would stay there 8 or 9 years before the production keeper eventually would come and say, like, Bob, get rid of that. It's been there forever. Contact Fiscal. Has the case been dealt with? There was a lot of stuff there. All the productions for this case, every single one of them was destroyed after that email. So basically everything was taken and incinerated, with 2 exceptions. One was the other pair of boots, and the reason for that is the cop who was asked to destroy them didn't do that. And the other one is the condom, and the only reason it wasn't destroyed, I suspect, is because nobody knew it was there. Find it. Because it wasn't on the original page. So if you looked at the page with all the productions, it wouldn't have been there because it was found
days
afterwards. So I don't express an opinion on this. I'm quite happy to leave this for your listeners to say, oh, well, okay, I think it's this or I think it's that, and, it's not suspicious or it is. I would rather just leave people with the facts, because when I first raised this, it was kind of, I think, put to the family that I had an axe to grind here. Either I wanted to make money out of it, which I don't, because I'm, didn't need to make money out of it, and neither of us do, or that we hated the police. And I didn't. I definitely didn't. I left the police on good terms. I think they were happy with me, and I was okay with them. That wasn't my rationale for leaving. I left for totally different reasons, which is another podcast, as is the same for Rory. But I would rather your listeners just decide based on the facts what they think went on, because I don't know. Yeah. And I don't know where Piglet is, and I'd love to know.
Yeah, to come in on that, it's very personal for me. I mean, like with most things, Bob's done it too many times in his life where you're walking the family to the scene of some god-awful road crash and they're laying flowers, We do that for, we go out our way and we do that to the best of our ability, and we'd get people up hills, we'd move heaven and earth to get families there, and this was no exception. And Nigel's parents, who were elderly, came up, and and we stood there, and there was a wee wicker cross and some daffodils, as I remember, because it was the time of year, and they were laid, and I'm standing there saying that this is where your son took his own life. Now, do I know that? Do I know that? No, because if you're to say to a parent, this is where your child took his or her life, you're going to question yourself as a parent. It's a very hard thing to hear. Now, if you come along years later and say, yeah, but maybe a big bad man did it and ran away, well, that's almost a straw. It's almost something to clutch at. It's a completely different thing. And it's why I never said it, and I never do, and always start with, this is a suicide. I believe it's a suicide, but I believe what my side of the story is this. Nigel death was not investigated properly. There's one very, very simple thing that would have stopped all of this, and we wouldn't be talking here today if it took place. DNA the condom.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
it might not have answered all the questions. It might not have answered the trail. It might not have answered the kit, the 2 sleeping bags, all that, but it would have answered a question in my head for sure.
Was there somebody else there?
Yeah. Was it his or was it somebody else's? Because that's a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Where it ends up, I don't know. It's interesting. It took another 3 years for me to walk away from the police. Again, dealing with something similar. At that point, I decided that was enough. And you have to come. You reach a level where you say, "This is the end now. This is the end," and you have to walk away. With Bob's book, my own notes jotted down, with the podcast and everything we do, we try to install humour in it. And what I always say is I loved my job. I loved the first 50 years of my job. It's not a job that exists anymore in terms of Scottish community policing, but it was a fantastic job, and neither me or Bob really. Bob slate the police, it wasn't that. We had an inside understanding of what was happening and why we were doing it, and we knew why we were doing it.
I think that's true. Can I just say, I do slate the police, but I slate police culture, organisation and management.
Yeah.
I have a lot of respect for cops, individual cops in uniform, particularly in uniform, going to jobs. It's a tough, almost sometimes impossible job.
It's extremely rewarding as well when it goes right, but when you have questions that, you're like, what is this about money? Is this about them not wanting to say sorry? Is this about losing face? Then you start questioning whether or not that is right, I think.
Yeah. I just think, why be in a job like that, which is somebody's actual life, unless you're going to do a good job with it?
It's funny you should say that. I used to say to probationers that I had or whatever, you can only do this job if you enjoy it. You can only do it well if you enjoy it, if you have an understanding of it, I used to have a wee mantra that said, we didn't know what we were doing. You don't, we're just people. And you don't have much to base it on. You've got some training on legislation and stuff. But I always stuck at it. It worked with me for at least 15 years. And it was always, if you were in this god-awful situation, what would you want a police officer to do? And I did it. And it was an act, and Bob will say the same thing, I mean, there was a reason neither of us probably didn't join CID or stuff like that, because you had to put on the uniform and become the part almost, and people would have to recognise you instantly as there to help and be the police, and then if you just stuck with what would you want a cop to do in this situation, do it, and it worked. And the problem then was I wasn't doing what I thought if it was my family member. Now, Bob used to say to me over these pints and all this, it was the one thing that kept nagging me, is that, but what was one of yours, Rory? What if it was your family member? Would you not want to know? Would you want to know that the police could have done more? And I suppose the answer to that ultimately is yes, isn't it?
It is, but the thing is, you'd want them to have done more at the time rather than it be a wound. Brought up again.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's recoverable now, unfortunately. Both because the police have changed in its nature, and well, the productions have gone quite apart from anything else. But back to the police won't ever apologise. It's not in their nature, because the culture in the police is you have to be seen to be right. It's very, very hard in the police to go back and say you made a mistake.
Yeah.
And when I joined, I remember being told by a senior officer, look, as long as you're in your motivation for doing something was good, we'll always back you up. We'll accept a mistake. That changed. It absolutely changed. It got to the point you had to be seen to be perfect in everything you did, and you couldn't be a human being.
Discretion was our gift, really, in uniform, and to be allowed that discretion, to be allowed to use your common sense and act like a person, like a human being, and not just a ticket machine. That's what it was. And I think it's no coincidence that if you look at the timeline as to when both Bob and myself came out of the police, it was when it became Police Scotland. And my humble opinion, I don't know if Bob's the same, was it became a business at that stage, and I wasn't in the business of making or saving money.
There was no discretion. I mean, again, that'd be a separate podcast into why we both left. A big part of why I left was the way I saw professional standards having targets and basically targeting cops who were good cops. But yeah, it became a business. It became about issuing tickets. There was no discretion.
No.
You stopped a good member of the public who'd made a simple mistake, speeding, having a pee behind a tree after a night out, all that sort of stuff. It didn't matter what it was. There was no discretion. There was no ability to just tell them off and let them go.
No.
It was all about stop searches and targets. And obviously there was a lot in the press about stop searching kids, which absolutely went on. It was a number. It was a KPI. You came back into the office and you reported it on a spreadsheet. And that was the way it was.
Yeah, and you could live with all that. Well, you could live with it. There was a relative sort of understanding, but when it came to the deaths of Nigel in particular and 4 other men that followed him 3 years later, that's enough at that point. That's way beyond someone getting a ticket because you don't have your discretion anymore. It's way beyond. You're there to serve and protect life, and if you're not doing that, what on earth are you doing? And look at where we are just now. That particular office I worked out of no longer exists. Neither does my neighbouring district offices exist anymore. They're all policed remotely from large city control rooms, and the response times are horrific. And nobody knows the names of the people in these hotels, or the forest workers, or the school, or anybody else, or the layout of the land. And that's sad. That is sad. The only positive there is the current Chief Constable, I believe, is talking about the answer to policing being community policing. And we're like, yep, really?
Yeah, it's going to be a struggle to get back to where they were, though.
Yeah.
You can't go back to all the offices being sold.
No, you can't. Anyway, that was the case of Nigel in our fictional heads, in our tiny little fictional world in the Scottish Highlands.
And none of this happened. Absolutely none of it. It's all fiction.
I know, you have a hell of an imagination, is all I can say.
Yeah, it's pretty good, isn't it? We're good with dates and places like that. We just pick dates up, we stick with them.
Yeah.
So there you have it. What have you been left thinking after listening to this 2-parter? If you have any questions, comments or thoughts about this case that you'd like to put to Rory and Bob, or if you have an opinion as to what could have happened to Piglet, you can contact me on Instagram at Scottish Murders Podcast. You can leave a comment on YouTube and Spotify, or leave a review on Apple, or send me an email at hello@scottishmurders.com, and I'll forward to Rory and Bob, and we may just do another episode to answer your questions. If you'd like to hear more from Bob and Rory about this fictional case, as well as hear the story behind Rory leaving the police, which is a cracker of a story, and as he mentioned it could be a whole other podcast, you can hear all about this by listening to their podcast Code 21, and listening to their episodes Where's Piglet Part 1 and 2, and episodes The Truth, The Whole Truth, and Nothing Like the Truth. I've listened to every episode of Code 21, and like I said, I love their podcast. There is a large amount of black humour and swearing, but each episode is hugely eye-opening and entertaining, and I understand their podcast is their way of dealing with and sharing all that they experienced, if this weren't a fiction, being former Scottish police officers. I hope you'll give Code 21 a listen, and I'd love it if you let me know what you think once you've heard the story around Rory leaving the police. Thanks again for listening to this 2-part special with Bob and Rory from Code 21. I've been your host, Dawn.
Scottish Murders is a production of Clurin Ton.